The debate topic for today is feminism good for society? Each of the debaters will have a 5-minute opening statement, and then the rest of the show will be open conversation, and there will be some breaks for messages from the audience. Oliver, you get the opening statement, so go ahead.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Brian, for having me on the show, and thank you, JImBob, for being here and agreeing to have this debate. I look forward to having a productive exchange of ideas. So the resolution we're debating, as Brian mentioned, was is feminism good for society? And I'll be arguing in the affirmative that yes, feminism has been good for society and will continue to be good for society. Before we dive in, I think it's important to clarify how we're defining feminism, or how I'm defining feminism in this debate, since definitions matter in any productive conversation to ensure we're not talking past one another. The version of feminism I'll be defending is the belief that individuals should have the same rights, opportunities, and basic respect, and should be given equal opportunities to succeed and not be prevented from doing so on the basis of their sex or gender. Now, notice what this definition does not say. It doesn't claim that there must be equal outcomes in every field. One common straw man of feminism is that feminism demands strict 50-50 representation in every field. Plumbers, electricians, bricklayers, garbage collectors, doctors, members of Congress, and so on. That's not what I'm arguing for, and that's not really what any feminist is really arguing for. Feminism doesn't seek to erase all difference and disparities, but what it does seek to do is remove the unjust barriers that often prevent women from entering or advancing in certain fields due to bias, discrimination, or certain expectations of what a man or woman's proper role is. Another term worth defining, because I think it's going to come up a decent amount, is patriarchy. Patriarchy is typically understood as a system that advantages men over women, granting them primary power across nearly all domains of society. So political leadership, moral authority, even epistemic authority, the idea that a man's knowledge or judgment should be inherently trusted more, and control over things like property and wealth. As with feminism, there are many strawman arguments surrounding patriarchy, so let me address a common one. Some argue that if men are suffering, whether it's because they dominate in dangerous jobs, or are more likely to be victims of violent crime, or have higher suicide rates, just to name a few examples, then patriarchy must not exist. But this misunderstands what patriarchy means. The existence of male suffering does not disprove patriarchy, because patriarchy refers to who holds power, not who experiences hardship. While men are absolutely harmed by many aspects of the patriarchal system, the people in positions of authority and control remain overwhelmingly male. So yes, patriarchy can and does harm men as well, but it systematically privileges men in ways that it does not for women. I have several concrete examples of how our society functions in a patriarchal way, and I'm happy to share those if needed, but from what I understand of JImBob's previously articulated positions, although maybe that's not what we're operating under, he doesn't deny that patriarchy exists. In fact, he appears to embrace it as a good and natural thing. So at least for the purpose of this debate, it seems unnecessary to spend time proving that patriarchy exists, so we can instead move on to a more substantive question, which is rather, should it exist? And this is going to be the claim of this debate, I think, largely, is whether patriarchy should exist in some capacity. Something I've seen JImBob do in previous debates is embrace what I view to be another straw man of patriarchy, in which he defines it narrowly as the idea that men serve as the enforcement arm of society, that only men can uphold law and order, and because they are on average physically better equipped for physical enforcement, they must have this authority. But this view is not only reductive, it's historically and sociologically incoherent. Patriarchy is not simply who can win in a fist fight, it's about who writes the laws, sets the norms, controls the institutions, and decides whose voices are taken seriously. Reducing patriarchy to brute strength is like explaining corporate power by saying CEOs have authority over their companies because they can beat up the interns. In reality, power is much more upheld by much more than muscle. It's reinforced through tradition, ideology, religion, economic control, and legal structures. The force doctrine idea here strips patriarchy of its complexity and reimagines it as this caveman logic of might makes right, which is not only inaccurate, but pretty intellectually lazy. The major point I want to make in my opening is this. You're going to hear a lot of claims made from JImBob about how feminism has supposedly led to a wide array of disastrous outcomes: declining birth rates, labor market saturation and wage stagnation, rising divorce rates initiated by women, and much more. For every claim he makes, I urge you to ask, has he actually demonstrated that feminism caused these outcomes, or have they merely occurred alongside the rise of feminism? Because one of the most common fallacies I see from anti-feminists is treating correlation as causation. Yes, feminism has grown, so has the gap between the rich and poor. Yes, feminism has grown, and the birth rate has declined. But that's not evidence of causation. To those who accept that line of reasoning, I'll remind you that there's a strong correlation between per capita margarine consumption and the divorce rate in Maine, or between the number of Nicolas Cage films released in a given year and the number of accidental drownings in swimming pools. My point is this: the burden is on JImBob to prove that feminism caused these trends, not merely that they happened alongside one another. And I will argue against this, that these societal shifts are a result of broader economic, cultural, and technological forces that are caused by a combination of many other factors. But feminism is not one of them. I won't just refute JImBob's claims that feminism has been an overall net negative for society. I will also affirmatively make the case that feminism has been a force for tremendous good. Higher GDP in countries that have greater labor force population, driven in large part by expanded opportunities for women, which can be directly linked to more people using their talents to contribute to the economy and society. Countries like Norway, Sweden, and Finland, which have fostered more egalitarian systems and removed many barriers women face in both work and public life, consistently show higher levels of prosperity and innovation. And we see similar gains in productivity output. Numerous studies have shown that gender-diverse teams perform better. A Princeton University study examining over 6 million research papers found teams that composed of both men and women produced more novel and influential work. Specifically, mixed-gender teams were nearly 10% more likely to publish novel research and over 30% more likely to be highly cited compared to single-gender teams. And that's not just this, feel-good rhetoric about diversity. It's measurable, concrete benefits of greater gender inclusion in the sciences and society at large. I'll wrap it up here, as I'm sure we'll explore many of these specifics further as the debate progresses. But as I will continue to demonstrate, the case is abundantly clear. Feminism has had a profoundly positive impact on society, and we must push back firmly and unapologetically against those who seek to drag us backwards. Thank you.
All right, JImBob.
All righty. All right.
Go with your open.
Thank you so much. All right. The debate is feminism good for society? Oliver defined feminism as individuals having the same rights, equal opportunities in the world, so on and so forth. I would argue that society, we have to define society real quick. Society is an aggregate of people living in an ordered system, an ordered community. I want to focus on that word ordered for a second, because without any order, without any force, without any threat of force, you really don't have a society. So when Oliver says equal rights, equal this, equal that, well, it's descriptively the case that it's not equal, because women, regardless of how much they want inequality, it's always enforced by men, which is an inequality. So there's an irony there that feminism fights for equality but relies on inequality. So looking at some key components of what makes a society, if you argue a society is good because of this reason, it needs these components. Law and order is one of the components, which I can't stress enough. Without it, you have nothing. If he assumes rights, that assumes law. If you assume law, that assumes force. So when Oliver says he reduces it to force, everything Oliver listed in his opening, whether or not you thought it sounded good, the only thing that's operating ultimately is force. If men decide not to give those things to women, they can do that. If men decide to give those things to women, they can do that. Essentially, feminism is a set of grievances and requests, a lot like a child in the room asking for more toys and then arguing for equality and calling the moment where the dad gives them the toys, they call that equality. It's pretty much like a LARP. Obligations and duties is a key one. Oliver even, in his counter to my reduction of the force doctrine, he included something called traditions, right? Well, obligations and duties is not something that feminism can provide at all. Feminism just has this major assumption of equality that is, in fact, an outcome. So there is no equality of opportunity even among men. So why would there be equality of opportunity among men and women? Obligations and duties is a key feature because the vision that Oliver has and many feminists have for society, they have a vision that the world is a certain way where women and men are doing all of these things together. But the reality is the operation of the world, the society itself, including the hardest manual labor jobs, which he listed, building bridges, tunnels, managing the sewer system. Suddenly, the feminist assumes that the men have an obligation to keep these things going. Let's say the men decided to stop all of that work for a second. They actually do it during strikes. That's leverage, right? So the men actually descriptively do have the power. I am not one of those oppositional people to feminism arguing that the patriarchy doesn't exist. The patriarchy does exist because it's descriptive of reality. It can't not exist. In other words, for feminism to do what it wants to do, it actually appeals to the patriarchy. It doesn't negate it. So for instance, if feminism is a movement away from men in power, let's say power is this is men and women are here. The idea is that we lower the men's power or we elevate the women's power. The problem is it's a request. It's a request. So if feminism is a movement away from the men in power and women's rights, let's say, is a feminist movement, why is it the case that women don't give themselves the rights? It's men who give them the rights. So if everything they're asking for under this feminist movement is a request from the power, they're actually affirming the patriarchy. So that's a good question for Oliver to answer during the back and forth. Why don't women just give themselves the rights? Why don't they just give it to themselves? Well, because they can't. Because collectively, women can't take rights and they can't protect their own rights. But yet, in the same breath, they're demanding these rights, but they have no obligation. That's not equality. So if feminism is about equality, I'm pointing out one very important aspect of society where equality can't possibly exist, nor would I want it to exist. I want the men in power. And if you press, especially women, you'll see on this podcast a lot of times, when you press them on this issue, they actually concede that they'd rather have men in these power positions keeping society going. I want to go back to leverage for a second. What does the woman have for leverage? For instance, let's look at voting for a second. So when men collectively vote, they're basically saying something. They're saying, I'm not going to group up with other men and overthrow the government. They're basically communicating, I'm forfeiting my will to gather other like-minded men, get our guns, and throw a rebellion. In exchange, I'm going to vote. Well, when a woman votes, what are they leveraging? What are they exchanging? There's nothing on the table for them to exchange. I would argue the only leverage women actually have in a society is their chastity, is their ability to have children, which is an extreme value. I would argue it's one of the most valuable things women could appeal to in their political exchanges, which leads me to the third part, people. You need people for a society. Yes. Reducing birth rates is a very important topic, whether you blame it on feminism or anything else. It's right in front of us. So the question I would have, if feminism was good for society, how is it that feminism doesn't advocate for children, for women to be mothers, for women to be in the home raising the next generation of children? After all, a society is made of people, and what good is a good society if it doesn't have good people? So the question tonight is for Oliver to confront these fundamental issues, the core issues. And I would argue that feminism is essentially in a kind of a performative contradiction. It says on one hand that they want equality, right? But they have no obligations. They say in the same sentence that they want rights, but they have no obligation or ability to even defend their rights. So to claim you want these things and this is fair, you're already smuggling in that there is a group of men who have to or should be obligated to protect you, defend you. So I'd ask Oliver, and it'll come up tonight, do men have an obligation to protect women? Do men have an obligation to enforce law? Do men have an obligation to fight even in wars to defend so-called rights? Well, the same obligation can't be made for women because they're collectively incapable, which is why you'll never see in the history of humanity a time where women gave themselves the rights. If they could have given themselves the rights, they wouldn't be asking the patriarchy to do it. So yes, I affirm the patriarchy, of course, but the question isn't whether a patriarchy is good for society, because societies can't exist without the patriarchy. It's a necessary argument. Whereas Oliver is tasked tonight to tell us, me and you and Brian and everyone watching, why is feminism good for society? I would say it's overall not good for society for a variety of reasons, one of which is the messaging for feminism has largely been sexual liberation for women acting more like shitty men, honestly, like that's liberating, promiscuity, that's some sort of liberation policy for feminism. They're right about one thing, though. Their leverage is sex. Their leverage is birth, the ability to give birth and be a mother. The problem with feminism is that it's inverted the power that women have. Their sexuality, their womb, it's inverted it and convinced them to use that advantage against themselves. And we're looking at it. You know, women are more in debt. Was it a good thing to shove all the women to the workforce? You think you're empowered until you're 40 and you have 3 cats and wine-stained teeth and you have no husband or children or legacy, and then you're dying to be invited to a wedding so you can talk to some groomsmen. This is not empowering. We have to reverse this. We have to reverse it soon. It's not just an issue of societal collapse, but it's an issue of morality as well, which I hope we get into.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Just
well,
open conversation now?
yeah, just open conversation. So I'll just go ahead.
Absolutely. I'd love to kind of get into this idea of the force doctrine. I want to just kind of make sure we have a mutual understanding there. So is your view that that the force doctrine is the idea that the patriarchy itself is inevitable because men possess greater physical strength generally than women, that they can at any time impose their will upon women?
Yes, they can impose their will on women and men.
Sure. Okay. So I guess I'm wondering, even if we grant, this idea that men are stronger than women generally, does potential equate to actual? Do you think that is kind of a general idea that we can operate off of? What could be the case is what should define how things are right now?
I would use more of induction. It's always been the case, and it seems to be always the case, similar to the sun rising, that men overall are going to be the ones enforcing and defending, offending, defending, and there's never been a case where women actually grant themselves the so-called rights that they're asking for or take those rights. So it goes both ways. Men can activate their force, take things from people. Men could activate their force and defend that people have things too. Now, feminism is the latter. So the question is, can women collectively overtake the patriarchy?
I mean, I think they technically could. So I think when we're talking about what could happen, we're talking about hypothetical things. So the entirety of men, I don't think will ever agree on enslaving women. Just every single person. There's always going to be some men that oppose them. Of course, there's going to be, maybe those men might win out in certain scenarios, but there's always going to be some men that are against them. So we're never going to have a situation where all men are trying to enslave women. So when I'm thinking about this, and I thought about this hypothetical, and I think it was brought up on a previous podcast episode, women could hypothetically, as you talked about, leverage the fact that they give birth and either kill themselves or kill their male offspring. And if they did that, and if they collectively did that, then they would have that power, right? They could leverage that.
If they can do that, men could hypothetically counter that by using force to stop that from happening, right?
I'm not sure. I think that if people want to end a pregnancy, if people want to end their own lives, they're very determined to do that, and I would be. I don't.
But if it came down to force, right? Well, if it came down to force.
Sorry, yes.
If it came down to force, the woman would have the collection of women who you convince to, work against their own existence and their children's existence, which is pretty close to feminism already. Men could actually step in, right, and reverse that. For instance, abortion's a perfect example of it. Women are fighting for the right to terminate their own children, right?
Legally, safely.
Right. Is that a good thing?
In my view, yeah, I'm pro-choice.
Okay. So it's already a good thing. So your hypothetical was, there could be a moment where women start terminating their own children. I'm saying they're already doing that in the millions.
Wait, no. They do that legally. But what happens when abortion is illegal?
What's legal, though? No. But that goes to my point, Oliver. What does legal assume, though?
Well, that it is permitted by society.
And permitted, absolutely. And if it wasn't permitted,
women would do it anyway.
So hold on a second.
How they do it
no, that's not the point. The point is, when you say legal, you're appealing to force doctrine.
I'm not denying that there is some role of enforcement in society.
Anything legal assumes the patriarchy. So this is what in my opening statement, Oliver, I want you to get is anything you think is good for women as a permission of behavior is going to be permitted and allowed by a collection of men with guns.
Sure. So my question would be, because you're defining patriarchy as the fact that men will always need to enforce things. that men always need to. I think that is a poor definition of patriarchy because
What else would it be, though?
Okay, well, I kind of gave a definition at the beginning here, this idea that it is a general idea that men hold more societal, institutional power, things of that nature. That they write the laws, they create the norms and the systems. That goes beyond just mere brute force. It really is, because think about this. Why don't the workers of a company just on a whim all the time overthrow the CEO?
Because it's illegal because of men.
Well, sure, but they could. If every single, or do you think there are more people technically of the working class that if they got together, they could overthrow the CEO?
If there was no legality to it, like when you say CEO and company, hold on. When you say CEO and company, you're already assuming law again. So you're using these terms.
I'm just talking about the figurehead.
I know, but Oliver, you're using terms and distinctions that necessitate that law already exists, right? That the force application already exists. I'm arguing from your perspective, it's better for you to say the patriarchy is good for feminism. Why? Because whatever you call feminism requires the patriarchy.
So this would be an argument that's equivalent to saying like having a militaristic authoritarian government.
We have one.
Is good for democracy. That's a good thing?
Well, no, democracy itself actually could produce authoritative governments.
Of course, no, it can. I'm correct. But would you say that because it is technically possible for the military to overtake the democratic government, that democracy itself doesn't exist?
No, I'm saying democracy itself requires the force.
Sure, but the people voting doesn't actually matter. It's
here. I'll ask it a different way. Can you give me a hypothetical of where a kind of feminism could exist in the vision you have, but doesn't require the collective of men using force to protect it?
I think there could be examples where women have superior technology, where the ones that they're able to, if they have a majority of the weapons, we can imagine this.
Who builds weapons?
I mean,
mostly.
Why does it matter who necessarily wins?
Because hold on, it matters, Oliver, because I asked you, can you give me a hypothetical where women could express their feminism and exist in a feminist society or whatever you are envisioning without the men? The men are building these weapons.
Because the men have always built the weapons.
No, because it's not because
you're appealing to the past to justify what's happening now.
Do you own a weapon?
What?
Do you own a weapon?
Like a firearm?
Okay, yeah.
No, I don't own a firearm.
Okay, so larger weaponry, even a firearm. Sure. The majority, a large portion of women can't even cock a gun. They can't clean a gun. They can't. Hold on. They can't break. Hold on. They can't break down a gun. Okay. And they can't carry larger equipment. So if you're arguing that the great equalizer is military equipment from small to large, that takes brute strength not only to make, but to maintain and to transport. And you're basically granting yourself that. You're just saying, like, look, Santa came. It wasn't the men who actually engineered and moved these large things around for us to use, right? Remote control bombing and whatnot, all these missile silos and whatnot. This requires massive amount of brute strength, right? You're just granting yourself the fruits of the brute strength in the hypothetical and saying, well, it could be the case that women could just find a pile of missiles in the woods, and then it's the great equalizer.
That's not the argument that
I'm saying,
though.
Without men, what does a collection of women do to sustain their...
What does a collection of weaker men do without stronger men?
No, I'm arguing for the stronger men.
Okay, so then your argument is basically that whoever is the strongest man out there, whoever has the most brute power right there, they are the ones who
dictate society.
Dictate society.
That's right.
So you are grateful then to men who are stronger than
patriarchy,
you.
yes.
You are grateful to men that are stronger than you for enforcing it. So why should you necessarily have rights?
I don't believe in rights.
Okay. I mean, so why should your right to vote be protected? Why should
I don't believe in vote? I don't think I should vote necessarily, but certainly not women, because if you remember in my opener, would you agree that when a collective of very strong men, stronger than me and you, right? The big burly ones with the cross-eyed, right? If they don't vote, would you agree that the alternative to voting would be just rebellion or brute force if they didn't agree with the government?
I mean, I think it still is. They can vote and they can still use brute force. Voting is kind of irrelevant there.
I'm saying that I'm not saying they could vote. I'm not saying they can't vote and then suddenly be like, you know what? I know I voted, but I'm going to still do this. I'm saying, generally speaking, the act of voting for men collectively, aren't they saying, I'm not going to rebel?
I don't think they're necessarily saying they're not going to rebel. They're saying that I would prefer not to. I think
Perfect.
I think I can get what I want by not using
Fair
brute
enough.
force.
I'll grant you that. It's just that if they prefer not to, I'm saying that the alternative is that they could, right?
Sure.
Okay. Women, if you switch it over to women, if women, they all start voting, right? Mm-hmm. What are they forfeiting?
What do you mean? What are they forfeiting?
If the man is forfeiting,
I don't think he is.
He is. He's basically saying, I'm going to vote and I'm going to hope that the outsourced force application, which is the military and the justice system and everything else included, right? They're outsourcing their brute force. Now, if they disagree and they decide voting isn't for you anymore and you're going to start a rebellion, they could do that. What I'm asking you, Oliver, is can women do that?
I don't necessarily think that, I don't like most women can, but I don't think most men can either. I don't think most men can.
It's not about
what you're doing is you're ascribing the quality of brute force to all men because they're a member of the category of male.
I am actually appealing to categories. I'm saying when it comes to categories, right?
Okay.
It's like saying this, like, are you in a category of beings that can think and do logic?
Yeah.
Can all human beings do logic?
Not necessarily. No.
But I'm appealing to the ones that can are in a certain category. What I'm saying is that category, Oliver, is men.
But no, not necessarily.
It's never a collection of women.
No, it could be young men. Why should old men get rights? Because young men are the ones that are defending them.
No, it's not. It's not that who gets rights. You're making an argument. You're the one affirming rights. I'm not. Right? Your whole view on feminism. My counter to feminism isn't about rights. I don't even believe in rights.
Okay.
Your view is that women have rights. That's good. I'm asking you, well, why isn't it the case, you think, Oliver, that women gave themselves the right to vote? Why did they appeal to another body of people to get the right to vote?
Because they're the ones who controlled society. Like, I don't really know what.
Yeah,
but I don't.
Correct.
You're basically making a massive just is-ought distinction.
No, I didn't say ought.
Is the case, therefore.
I didn't say ought. I didn't say ought.
Then I can agree with your entire descriptive claim and say, yeah, then that's not how we should structure society.
Yeah, but if it's descriptively true that the ones you're going to be appealing to from the woman's perspective is always a collection of strong men, then your argument that you're making the ought normative statement that we ought to pursue feminism, that it's good for society. What I'm saying is that anything you call feminism actually affirms the patriarchy.
No, because you're defining patriarchy in terms of the enforcement arm that involves
What else
men.
could it be?
It's not because patriarchy, as I talked about before, is a bunch of different things
List
that come
one.
together. Okay, I'm happy to go up
One
there.
at a time.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. It's typically understood as a system that advantages men over women, granting them primary access across all domains
Stop
of society.
there. Stop there. One at a time.
Okay.
Is brute strength an advantage over women?
It not necessarily. It can be, but it not always is the case.
Okay. Is it a advantage over women?
It can be, but not all men are stronger than all women.
I understand. But generally speaking, if there's a collection of men and a collection of women, and there's the same amount of each, it's going to be the case that the collection of men, even if they're weak men, are going to be stronger than the women, right?
True.
Okay.
However, no. But
next
you're
on the list.
No. But this is important. You're assuming that all the men will necessarily agree to impose their will.
I'm not talking
on
about
the
what they're
women.
agreeing. I'm saying they could, not whether they agree.
And women could kill their children.
It doesn't matter. Then you don't have a society.
Okay, cool. So everyone could pursue their own self-interest. Society would implode, and where are we?
We're at liberalism. That's what feminism is. Pursuing your own self-interest and your wants. That's what you trained women to do under feminism. Right. Pursue your individualism. There's no greater obligation for women. Like, for instance, under feminism, is there any obligation to have children?
No. But there's no obligation for men to have children either.
Hold on.
Having children is not an obligation.
It depends on the worldview, but generally, just being a man, yes, you're not obligated.
Yes.
This is why the ought, which is your affirmative tonight, does require a meta-ethical position, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
that's what I'm getting to.
Yeah.
So under your view, if it's the case that feminism doesn't have an ought to have children,
yes,
is it a society better? Let's say there was a society without feminism, but it had it didn't affirm your idea of feminism, but it produced an ought statement of obligation to have children. Is that society better than the feminist one?
No.
Well, if it survives, is it better?
Not necessarily. I don't think a society surviving in which women have zero rights or zero, are not well off.
What's a right?
What?
Can you define a right?
An entitlement.
Entitlement. So are there any, if an entitlement, is that given to someone?
In a large sense, yeah. Men and women, it's given to them.
Who gives women entitlements?
Society.
Well, that's pretty
Yes.
vague.
Well, it is society. We as a society decide on which entitlements
Hold on. Let's
have.
look at the 19th Amendment for a second.
Okay.
When women started screaming, some of them, the minority, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
were started screaming for the right to vote, right? Who are they screaming to give them the right to vote?
People who were in power,
Who are those
were
people?
men. Yeah, but you're just making a statement that was the case.
I'm asking you, why do they appeal to the men in power and not just give themselves rights?
Because those are the people that are in power. You're
Men.
asking, they were excluded from being in power.
So when is it where women will be in the power position where men are asking women for rights?
When there are women who are in power. Do you think, wait a second, if there is a female CEO and a man walks into her office and it's like, I would like a raise, is he not asking her to grant him some sort of privilege or some sort of benefit? Absolutely.
Yeah, but this is not the same category as a raise, because the raise doesn't depend. Well, actually, it does. It depends ultimately on force, which appeals to men. So the question for you, Oliver, was
strong
this:
people. It appears to people who have the ability to enforce their will.
People have the ability to enforce unjust or just laws. So when you want a just law, when a bunch of women, right, when they wanted the right to vote, they were asking other people to give them the right to vote.
That's how all rights work.
I understand. Rights work because they're enforced by brute force every time.
Yeah, there requires enforcement.
So
all men don't enforce.
I know it's not about all men. It's that the fact that the people enforcing are going to be predominantly men, and if they were predominantly women, they couldn't enforce it. Let's switch it for a second. Hold on, let's switch it again. Men want the power, the right to vote. Right? Let's switch the history, right? Men want the right to vote. The enforcement are women as you see them today.
Not as we say today. If we want to flip the entirety of history, no. Wait a second.
We're not changing. We're not all else equals.
No. You can't do that.
No,
because that's not how society develops.
No, that's how a hypothetical works.
No, but you can't change the hypothetical and not change the relevant variables.
Look,
we would have to have society exist so that women, over the entire course of history, had built everything, had excluded men.
No, I
didn't
say men or women. I'm saying in this instance.
Okay.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is you're actually agreeing with me that throughout history, why is it that men with the brute force built all of the things?